Welcome to this episode of the Life Science Success Podcast. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Don, and I'm a digital marketer in life sciences. And my guest today is Mark Stead. He is the leader or the head of discovery and business development at Atomic AI. They're a pioneering biotech company using artificial intelligence and structural biology to develop innovative RNA targeted therapeutics. And with that, let me just welcome Mark.
Great. Thanks, Don. Happy to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you on. And if you don't mind, if you could just start by just telling me a little bit about what it was that led you to life sciences, and especially, to where you are today.
Yeah, happy to. Yeah, so Don, when I was, thinking about careers early on, I knew I wanted to help people. And originally that meant, could I be a physician? And started to go through that process, went to undergrad, took all the hard courses, and started to shadow physicians. And I realized that there was a broad subset of patients that despite excellent clinical care and state-of-the-art tools, could not be helped. I distinctly remember there was a mesothelioma patient who was quite advanced, lived with this condition for far longer than average. And the physician, after meeting with this patient, was like, I love this guy. I wish there was something I could do to help. And it became clear to me that while I would love to make an impact on individual patients, I think I could have a broader impact at a level of actually inventing the medicines rather than necessarily prescribing and through the clinical route. And so that set me on a different path. Could I go into drug discovery and development and help make medicines? Um, and then it turns out the life science sector and the biotech industry is fascinating, and there's many ways to have an impact on patient outcomes, and it's a great kind of way to do well for yourself, and but also make the sort of societal impact that I think many of us strive to do in the industry. So it's a great place to be, and also very intellectually challenging.
It's one of my favorite parts. I mean, I certainly love the puzzles that we get to unwind. Just the way that my mind works, even though I'm not close to the drug development side of it. In most cases, at the same time, I do find it to be intellectually challenging most days, and in terms of thinking of you know ways to untangle the things that we have to do in our industry. So
Yeah, absolutely.
so how did your experience at Excelsius, Kite, and Amgen shape your approach to business development and drug discovery?
Yeah. Um, so each of those companies have very different approaches, right? And I think there's almost an infinite number of ways, right, to be successful within the biotech and life sciences industry. Amgen was my first, biotech job. And there I was both on the business or the bench side. So I started off as a scientist, working on biologics and doing drug discovery, and then went into the business development group there at Amgen, working on early stage technology licensing. And Amgen had a very particular set of needs when it comes to partnering, a very different outlook, let's say, than other companies on what sort of modalities do we work on, what strategies do we put in place, right, to make an impact for patients. And that theme continued. Kite, I mean, modality was cell therapy, obviously. Very different perspectives on what are the needs of the business, what are the needs of the assets, what are the strengths of the companies, and kind of how does that affect your relationships with partners. Exelixis was my last job before coming to Atomic, and uh, you know, that was the smallest company I'd worked with up until that point, and yet Exelixis is a pretty large, mid-sized biotech pharma. 2,000 employees and commercial product. But it's funny how the differences that happen when you have 2,000 people, right, and roughly $1 billion in revenue a year versus when you have greater than 100,000 employees, right? It's just a very different environment. Um, right? So when thinking about the differences in business development, it really means that I had access to a larger toolbox in terms of levers, right, that you can implement within a negotiation or contract. You had different strengths and weaknesses, right, for each one of the companies I worked at, but also it influenced how the partner might complement, right, those strengths. In fact, one of my some of my last work or deals I worked on at Exelexis were option deals, where actually the partner had a significant amount of involvement, continuing involvement in clinical programs. That was new for me, right? Whole new set of challenges, right? When you're working with a great set of, I mean, wonderful external partners, but they have a serious involvement, like operational role in the development of these programs. Um, so I think the exposure to a variety of ways of thinking, different key value drivers, different ways to structure, different needs, it was fascinating. Um, and then from a drug discovery approach, right, each of these companies very different strengths in how you would go about the drug discovery process. There's no right or wrong way necessarily to do drug discovery. All there is shades of what are you good at and what is your risk tolerance.
Mm.
And so, learning about, how each one of these organizations and groups of fantastic people think about those challenges really kind of opened my eyes to different ways to solve difficult problems.
Yeah, I feel like, I mean, the perspective that you have in being able to sit on both sides of the table, has to be a benefit as well, because you certainly understand, what are the um, partners that you have at Atomic, what are they thinking about, what are they considering, and what sort of things might be, top of mind for them. But also, in terms of just, the criticality of these partnerships for so many of these companies. I feel like, look, it provides a level of certainty around the work that you're doing, and certainly helps you sort of structure things in a way that provides real world value as well.
Absolutely, Don. It is different on the small biotech side than it is on the large pharma side. And, of course, that going into it, right? You're going to have different teams, different needs. But it is a different thing to live that challenge day in and day out. Um, your point about having the perspective on both sides of the table, I think is right on the money. Um, I mean, I know how I'd look at data, right, coming from a pharma perspective. Um, in some ways, when you're doing BD search and evaluation, you're almost like a professional deal killer. You're looking for all the problems. You're looking for where are the skeletons, in the closet, where are they buried? And so now, when reviewing data on the biotech side, I can see the bodies. It's just like how do we make it the best data package we can, given the time and resources that are available, right? So it's this constant triage of this is the thing we need to solve right now, this is the thing I wish we could, but we can't get there yet, right? So it's a lot of strategy. But having that perspective, so I kind of know, what does it look like from the other side of the table? It's absolutely helpful. Um, yeah, it's also a very different thing when you've got a large organization where, I mean, I distinctly remember on, working in discovery at Amgen, if I ran into a particular problem with something, down the hall was probably the world's foremost expert in whatever that problem might be, right? And go ask them, how do I solve this? And it's different when you're a company of 25 people. Kind of got to
Yeah.
figure it out, right? Or find an intro to the person who might point you in the right direction. So very different.
Yeah, I mean, it is one of the things that we were talking about coming into the podcast, right? Is that I've worked for some of the largest companies as well, and just whenever it came to sort of staying in touch with the industry, I mean, I didn't have that problem either, and then sort of breaking away and starting my own thing. This is my first question as well. Is like, how do I stay in sync? And I never even thought about it, from the scientific discovery side, or even whenever you run into issues, in the research that you're doing, side of things that, other people in similar organizations, still have challenges.
Absolutely, yeah. I never really anticipated how isolating in some ways it would be, being at a company that's very small. But I also have to say that a lot of those really strong relationships, that you build at larger companies, they don't necessarily go anywhere. Um, right? It's funny how I run into an issue or whatever, and I call somebody that I worked with, you know, 10 years ago, right? And they pick up the phone. Right, and you can kind of reestablish those relationships. Much as we were discussing earlier too, I think you've done a great job, right, in keeping up with folks, and this podcast is one way to do that. I struggle with it. I need to make more time to connect with the people that have had an influence in my career, and the people that I enjoy working with. Yeah, I think that's a challenge for all of us.
Yeah, absolutely. So, can you tell us a little bit more about what you're working on at Atomic AI and how does it leverage AI and then structural biology?
Yes. Atomic is a very interesting company and very interesting technology. So we use artificial intelligence and foundation models, along with the world's largest proprietary data set of RNA-related structural information, to predict high accuracy tertiary structures of RNA. Um, so that's kind of the AI angle that we use, and I firmly believe we have the most accurate structural predictions in the world when it comes to RNA, and particularly disease-relevant RNAs that you might want to go after as a drug target. Um, we then use those insights to develop small molecules that target RNA with potency and the specificity necessary to make a drug. And our current direction is to discover those binders, things that are highly potent and selective for a very specific disease-relevant human mRNA, and then functionalize those to cause the degradation of that mRNA in cells and eventually humans. Um, it's a very exciting place to play. It's also extremely challenging. As you may be aware, RNA is highly flexible. There are only four bases, right? Versus, proteins where you have a giant kind of swath of diversity that you can target to get unique binding pockets. RNA is just challenging all the way around. And so these structural insights are uniquely enabling when it comes to RNA to help us to find and derive potent and specific molecules. So,
Very good. So, what are some of the most innovative projects that you're currently working on at Atomic, and how do they address previously untreatable diseases?
yeah. So I think anybody who's worked in the drug discovery or biotech or pharma industry has, come to know there are broad sets of targets that everybody knows what they are, right? These are the undruggables, the things with great human biology, but for one reason or another at the protein level are intractable. And so, just to name some examples, right, of things everybody knows, right, you've got like beta catenin, MYC, right, these transcription factors or oncology, targets that very well understood human genetics. And over time, of course, some of these things do become tractable. New technologies open up at the protein targeting level to make them work. Um, but going after the RNA level is a whole new way to get at that same disease biology. So if your protein doesn't have a binding pocket you can target, or has a very closely related homolog at a protein level that doesn't allow you the ability to target one over the other at the protein level, the RNA conservation, right? If not even in the coding region, perhaps in the untranslated regions on either end of the coding sequence, targeting that enables a different way to get at that same message, or that same gene expression profile. So, doing that, we have a very wide swath of undruggable biology we can go after. We have a way to find the druggable pockets of RNA using our structure predictions. And we are rapidly building and working with the tools that enable potent and selective small molecules to then destroy those messages and knock down gene expression of those undruggable targets. So it's a very exciting approach. It is not without challenge, But it's a very exciting way to go after some of this disease biology that would be a huge benefit to patients.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of think about these things as well, that as the challenges that have remained for an awful long time, kind of across industries. What do you see as kind of the timeline for some of them, given AI tools and things like that? I mean, and just trying to expand a little bit, on your previous answer with the undruggable, untreatable diseases.
Yeah. So I guess one way to approach that question is thinking about RNA biology itself. So, you know, right now, where the field stands is that very few people have been able to come up with with potent small molecules that bind a specific RNA structure. Um, and there's many reasons for that, right? One is I think the fundamental rules of or the physics even of small molecule RNA interactions are not understood in a way, certainly not to the depth that protein small molecule interactions are understood. And so, in some ways, when you're working on a small molecule target, you're doing it blind. You don't necessarily know the structure. They're tough to determine empirically. You're also not completely aware of all the interactions that might happen. You don't know what good looks like, right, when it comes to these small molecules. And so, our platform gives us a way to address that. But in terms of timeline, how long will it take, right, to go from where we are today to making substantial impact in patients? I mean, it's hard to say. I think in some ways we're already at the point of making an impact. I mean, for example, PTC Therapeutics has an RNA targeted small molecule splicing modulator, right? Edvardsy or risdiplam, which for SMA patients is a huge benefit. So that's a molecule that can actually restore function, can provide the SMN2 protein for SMA patients. So I think there are proof of concept molecules out there, and there are other molecules in the clinic as well that can lead to changes in gene expression that are caused at an RNA level. But the ability to go from those mechanisms of an RNA-targeted small molecule to the mechanism I'm, pursuing right now with my colleagues at Atomic, which is to actually cause the direct degradation of an mRNA using a small molecule, it's a challenge. I would like to tell you that we're going to be able to get there in a year or two and show, great proof of concept and start working on a lead ID. But the fact is, this is science. And if we could just predict those sort of things at the outset, then everybody would be, um, we would show far more success on a variety of targets than the industry overall has been able to achieve.
Yeah, I can remember in the early 2000s having conversations with people about how exciting that monoclonal antibodies were going to be, and how, game changing it was going to be. And then it's like decades later, all of a sudden, like monoclonal antibodies, are a reality. But I mean, it took all of those decades of work, to kind of get to the point where, the reality of having a COVID treatment or anything else that's essentially built off of mRNA capability. um it was something that to me was a matter of listening to the science early on, and then sort of watching all of you do your hard work, and watching it result in something. I look forward to something like that happening here. So let's take a little bit, more, and unpack the crystal ball on AI then. So,
Yeah,
how do you sort of envision, AI transforming the drug discovery process, and then also where do you see it, going in the future?
yeah. Um, so I think it's hard to find anybody in the industry that isn't trying to find or to apply artificial intelligence to drug discovery. Um, right. It's all of the rage, right, when you talk to companies large and small. And they're doing, that application to a variety of degrees, right? Some means, we're using Chat GPT ask questions about biology. And for others, that means we're collecting, extremely large scale, data sets that we can now train foundation models on, and everything in between. So when I think about artificial intelligence and the impact, I think um, there's going to be a few different ways to drive for impact, right? One is going to be speeding up the things that are, uh, more administrative or research-based tasks, like doing literature searches, and that I think is starting to bear some fruit. I think we're starting to see less hallucinations, less, completely ridiculous information come across with some of these models, and my expectation is that over time that's going to get better. And then there are, questions that we're trying to address with artificial intelligence that are based on really large data sets, right? Like easily to, easier to obtain data sets. An example of that would be things like AlphaFold, right? Where you're trained on, all of the publicly available protein, structural information. That's a reasonably large size data set. It's high quality. And it's led to an enablement within structural biology and structure guided drug discovery for proteins. Um, what I see as more of a challenge is integrating AI to look at these disparate data sets that exist within organizations, whether it's biotech or pharma. Um, as we've seen at Atomic, trying to integrate data sets that were not kind of designed for artificial intelligence, and maybe generated by a variety of people with variety of different goals in mind, with different degrees of reliability and accuracy, it leads to models getting quite confused. And you start applying those data sets, and then what you get out is no longer at the quality necessary to drive impact. Um, and so one of the things that I think many folks are starting to work with is, well, how do we QC the information that we're training these models on? How do we curate it in a way that you can kind of eliminate the less reliable, and help the model to sort the good from the bad and the less reliable and the more reliable? But I think that effort is extremely challenging, based on what I've seen so far. I think the more powerful application is companies that take an AI first approach to generating that data. And we're starting, I mean, we certainly do that at Atomic, right? We're generating data sets that are adjacent or helpful to drug discovery, but are not the same data sets you would generate for a drug discovery program. And we generate that at extremely large scale. We're talking billions of data points and designed specifically for AI training and not necessarily human interpretability. Um, and other companies are doing that as well, right? I see, there was a couple large pharmas recently that announced kind of their efforts to do closed cycle drug discovery, right? Where they're doing large scale antibody generation, let's say, and using that information now to train models to do protein structural prediction work or binding predictions, right? Some of these, there's a lot of applications, right, that you can do that sort of training for. But it's a mental leap, right? It's being able to go from I'm doing experiments just to advance this, drug discovery program, and oh, we'll try to use the data later to drive value, versus now let's generate data that we think would be useful from a drug discovery perspective, but the primary purpose is AI. Um, that is something that I think is going to pay dividends over time, as long as you're asking the right question of the AI. Um, one of the things that I work with very hard at Atomic is we try not to do the things that are just faster, cheaper. That's not the thing to try to solve with artificial intelligence. I think the more powerful application is we try to ask the questions of what can the AI help us do that would be difficult or impossible without it, right? So try to unlock those sort of questions, and if we can generate data that's related to those questions at scale with reproducibility, that's I think going to be either for Atomic or for others, right? In other drug discovery fields, that's where the value is going to be unlocked. And in terms of the pace, I think we're making strides every day. So I don't think it's going to be too terribly long, like in the order of years, 2, 3 years, we might see some additional improvements. Perhaps we see additional de novo antibody work. We start seeing chemistry hits come out of thin air, right, on some really challenging targets. Those things are going to continue to happen. Well, I think we'll rack up some successes. And then if we could only figure out how to apply these lessons to clinical development, where most of the money and is going into drug discovery and development, that I think is going to be a huge game changer. But my suspicion is that's going to take time.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear all of those perspectives. I mean, I have a few things to sort of run past you just to get your perspective, and I'm going to use outside of life sciences examples, more or less to sort of, hopefully make this more synergistic for everybody, right? I mean, I sort of think of the challenge in front of you, um, especially whenever I see things. I mean, so we create a lot of images for marketing materials using AI. I mean, it's just, one of the primary uses that we have. I've never had very many graphic designer interactions, and it's primarily because we've been able to leverage AI for the things that we do. But I mean, I know where to look in an image, and I sort of train my team on the same thing. Like,
Mhm.
whenever you have people sitting around a table, I want everybody's hands, if they're visible, I want them to have 5 fingers. I don't want them to have six. I don't want them to have four. I don't want like a really odd shaped, looking hand or anything
Yeah.
like that. All of those to me are triggers for an AI created image. In addition to that, the text has to be spot on. It always amazes me how many models get it wrong. The latest image gen model from Google has done a pretty good job. We've got a couple other ones that we use primarily whenever we're trying to get really high quality text and things like that out of things that have worked, extremely well. But I mean, it's always amazing to me, how often just that those simple things are not right. And my son recently was working on, he's an instructor for physical therapy, and he uses quite a few images in the things that he does, and he wants some specific images, and so we were trying to use some of the models. And then each time I would present an image that I thought looked okay, he would come back and say things like, well, it forgot the deltoid muscle and things like that. So it's like, you look anatomically, if it can't get things right, I kind of worry a little bit then about, the applicability, I guess, of, like how far you could carry this with drug discovery. But to sort of, finalize my statement and then, get your reaction. The part I absolutely love, though, on the other side, I'm not a coder, so I don't write code, but I come up with creative ideas, I feel like, for programs all the time based on conversations I have with you guys, and just conversations in passing about business problems people have. And I'm like, look, I know I can automate this section. If I had a user interface for this other part, I could have like a complete program to hand back to you that solves your problem. And on the vibe coding side, I mean, it's been amazing. I mean, I sort of sit here and like, start at the highest level, like,
Hmm.
here's my idea, can you create a user interface for this? And then I sort of link it with some of the automation tools that we have. And I'm like, so here's, essentially how I'm going to get data to you, and I want you to be able to send data back. And it's amazing on that front. I mean, and in a day or so, I can normally have a pretty complex, application that has full login capabilities and everything else for somebody to go use to solve a business problem. So I've absolutely loved that side of it, and can't wait to
Hmm.
see it on the drug discovery side now.
Yeah. But I think you made a really great point, right? On artificial intelligence is at a point where it can do extremely powerful things, and it's a wonderful tool. Um, but you have to use it the right way, and it doesn't replace the people that have the expertise, right? So that process of taking a look at the hands, right? Or hey, you didn't have a deltoid muscle. That's kind of weird, right? Um, the same thing applies to drug discovery, right? The our models might come up with a structure with high confidence that nope, that doesn't exist in life, right? You can tell because you know something about how RNA folds. Or the same thing is true for chemistry, right? Well, great, that molecule looks like a grease ball. That's not developable, right? So I don't think that artificial intelligence, at least in any sort of foreseeable future, is going to be replacing the scientists and folks who understand the drug discovery process. Instead, what I think is AI is a tool, and
Yeah.
it's going to be kind of the standard, right, by which many difficult, currently untractable problems are solved going forward, but with the guidance and help and experience of a person who's been there and done it. Right. So yeah, I think it's going to be a while before we tell chemists they can go home.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think, yeah, I mean, I just see too many opportunities still to get it wrong. And whenever you got humans involved or lives on the line, the last thing you want to do is trust something that you really shouldn't be making decisions on its own. So yeah, thank you for that perspective. Mark, what's the
Absolutely.
greatest piece of leadership advice that you've ever received?
Yeah. I think for me that's a two-part. One is listen. But it's not just listen, it's listen for understanding, right? Take a moment to take a step back and truly understand what somebody's telling you beyond the words, right? What are their concerns? Where is this coming from? What does this mean? Right? And try to elicit and be curious enough about what they're saying to truly get it. And that's a very necessary thing before you do any sort of reaction. And then the other part of that is the reacting. Don't hit the panic button. Doesn't matter what it is, don't hit the panic button. I mean, unless it's on fire, literally. Right. But have that, I have a bias for action, of course, and I think many of us do in the industry. But taking that beat to kind of just step back, think, look at the big picture and ask, okay, what do we do now? Let's not hit that panic button.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting statement, from a panic button standpoint, because one of the startups that I was in, um, one of the interesting things that I sort of, you get sort of this, I don't know, that like, somebody crying wolf a little too often, um,
Mhm.
reaction. And I just remember multiple times, right? The essentially we'd get the latest research information back from the machines that we were operating, and the data would be there. The scientists would be looking at it, and they're like, "Man, I don't even know if we're gonna have a job tomorrow." Because I mean, this essentially says that what everything that we're doing is wrong, and that we you know essentially, can't make final decisions on the diagnostic that we were developing. And I remember multiple times sitting in meetings where the data science people were sitting there and they're like, well, what's the problem? And they're like, well, because of this and this, we can't see anything that essentially looks like, we're able to detect, the thing that we're looking for. And with a couple filters and some fancy math, they eventually hand back the data to the scientists, and they're like, oh, this is perfect, this is exactly what we need. Emergency avoided, and we all get to go back to our normal day job again. But it was just kind of funny because I just remember multiple sessions where it's like, look, this is bleak, and I'm like, eventually I got to a point where I was like, look, before I start thinking about anything else, I want to hear like what the whole team has to say. Let's sort of make sure that nobody else has any other options. Because I mean, normally we had brilliant enough people where somebody would come in and say, I think if we do this and this, we can overcome this problem, or there was some way of filtering the data differently, where all of a sudden we got a different look. So yeah, I agree with the don't hit the panic button too.
Yeah, I think we may have worked at the same place, Don. Yeah, it's an
Yeah,
important lesson.
yeah, absolutely. What excites you?
Um, Exciting for me is the breakneck pace of scientific innovation. We are seeing new things every day or on a very regular cadence that were simply impossible a short time ago. And yeah, artificial intelligence is a wonderful tool, but it's beyond that as well. There's creativity and innovation happening all over the sector. And I would really like to, continue to be in the school of biotech and making drugs and, the next 5 to 10 years and see the progress across the industry and watch some of these undruggables now become reality. And I think we're on the cusp of some really innovative breakthroughs for patients. So that's incredibly exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. What concerns you?
Um, I think the current concern for me is the AI hype cycle.
Mm.
It's really it's difficult sometimes for folks to separate fact from fiction, right? And also for folks to kind of see, oh, everybody's doing AI, it's table stakes, and not really understanding the differences between what somebody might call AI versus, a more foundation model approach. Or, I mean, for example, at Atomic, we're using supercomputer time, right, to run some of these things, and it's completely custom and nothing's off the shelf, right? But it's difficult talking with folks when it's like, oh yeah, well we use AI too. I've got Chat GPT right here, right?
Right.
The concern for me is folks use the wrong tool. They get discouraged and then aren't really willing to try AI for the right things. And so I hope that over time and with the right smart people doing the right things, we'll continue to see the innovation that we need.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting that you bring this up because one of my early morning meetings this morning was centered around. So I was on with a few university professors who were talking about the fact that some universities have adopted, you know, the use of AI, and some universities still are resisting. And I mean, it's interesting to me because, one, I have a business that, primarily uses AI for all sorts of things to improve efficiency in terms of creating, content and things like that. We don't just let it run without doing some human checks. But at the same time, I mean, I could only imagine the hours and weeks that we would spend sometimes to do some of the things that we currently do in a matter of minutes. And uh, what concerns me even more is, like, the students that are not learning this stuff and eventually are going to get passed over, right, because of the fact that they come out of school and think they have this fresh, piece of paper that says that they can go do this stuff, and oh, by the way, they don't know anything about it, either the industrial application or even the commercial application of the tool. And so,
Mhm.
yeah, I couldn't agree with your statement more, though. Understanding where this is going and what it can do and the differences is important.
Absolutely. Yep.
Last question: what inspires you?
Yeah. So professionally, I've had the great fortune of working with really fantastic colleagues, both in my current position, but also in my past companies and roles. Um, really for me, it's about the people that I work with, because the impact that they can have on your development, your productivity, your outlook, what things are you paying attention to in terms of the industry. You can have a lot of fun or you can have a miserable experience, right, in these places with depending on who you're around. I got to say, I've been extremely lucky to work with great people. Um, and watching people across kind of a diversity of backgrounds and experiences and different training and traditions working together to make an impact, right, for people who desperately need it, it inspires me every time. And I got to say, the people who've had the most influence on me are the ones who take the opportunity on a regular basis to take a step back, step away from the bench, step away from their computer, and really focus on the bigger impact, right? Look at the bigger picture and figure out how can I make an impact at scale. Um, that for me is very inspiring.
Yeah, absolutely. And Mark, thank you so much for the conversation today. It's been an inspiring one for me as well, just looking at atomic AI and the things that you guys are working on. And yeah, I look forward to hearing more about the things that you're working on in the future.
Wonderful, Don. It was a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thanks a lot.